I thought in this weird online environment, I would close by trying to sum up what we've studied starting in August, going through today. Of course, we started in the colonial time period when Europeans first came over. They came over to Virginia looking for gold in Jamestown.
No! Not even for $4? Ow, my eye!
As we all know, that didn't go very well.
Son, let me have a lick at you.
They came to New England and Massachusetts in search of having their own freedom to practice their own religion. They came for God.
Prithee keep shooting, Goodman Lou.
A constable man musket taketh 3 of the Lord's minutes to reload.
Then buckle their necks as you would thine hat.
Of course, they didn't let others worship how they wanted, but it was important that they could worship how they did. That's how the Puritans rolled.
Rod, Todd, this is God.
As Americans grew older and actually became Americans more than British, they became more and more distant from the mother country.
Why can't you stay with your parents?
Oh, the Admiral and I don't get along.
And they became more and more angry at the English rule, in particular English taxes.
It'll cost you.
Oh, the taxes!
Come on.
All right, that's a good point. The taxes!
These taxes would eventually lead to the American Revolution, which against all odds, we win, becoming the United States of America. We studied at that point the Constitution and some basics of the 3 branches of government, but we spent most of our time looking at the Supreme Court and famous Supreme Court cases. And should the government protect us as individuals, or should they protect us as a group in society? Should the government and the courts focus on our safety, or should they prioritize our freedom? The Supreme Court mock trials gave us an idea of how our government is always changing.
All we have to do is search every locker.
Oh, Bart, I'm not sure random locker searches are permitted by the Supreme Court.
We then went back to American history where we looked at our first president, George Washington. In many ways, my favorite president. He only served 2 terms, so unusual. Most of the time at this time period, leaders stayed for a lifetime. He didn't wear uniforms or take fancy titles.
I got the white stars you wanted, but I couldn't find any red hearts, yellow moons, or green clovers.
Well, I'll use it, but I'm not paying for it.
When he left office, he gave an address where he warned Americans about things he'd learned as president. He warned Americans that political parties were a danger. He warned them that getting tangled up in other foreign countries was a danger. And he warned Americans identifying with your region or your state before your country will have problems. He was right on all fronts. During his time, we studied the first 2 political parties. Their ideas remain with us today. Many of the same things political parties fight about today and politicians fight about today, Thomas Jefferson and Alexander Hamilton were fighting about when this all began. Alexander Hamilton led the Federalists, primarily representing the North and big cities. He liked banks and strong government power. The second party was the Anti-Federalist, known as the Democratic Republicans, led by Thomas Jefferson from Virginia in the South. He thought farms were the way to go, small government and state government. He was against big government and federal government.
It's true. We are aliens. But what are you going to do about it? It's a 2-party system. You have to vote for one of us.
He's right. This is a 2-party system.
Well, I believe I'll vote for a 3rd-party candidate.
Go ahead. Throw your vote away!
A few years later, Thomas Jefferson becomes the 3rd president of the United States. One of the things we remember him most for was his purchase from France of Louisiana, where he had Lewis and Clark go west, mapping out great parts of North America.
It's been 2 years, so our brave explorers should be right about here. You morons!
Wait, that's my brother.
Only a few years after Thomas Jefferson, we're back at it again with England over trade disagreements, impressments where they're kidnapping our sailors and make them force in the British Navy.
Oh, wait a minute. There they are, Larry Burns and his kidnapper. Appearing in broad daylight with police everywhere, ladies and gentlemen, there's only one word for that. Idiocy.
We declare war in the year 1812. It was the War of 1812. After winning the War of 1812, we consider ourselves an adult nation. The rest of the world views us as a much more powerful nation than they had previously. They expect us to last. During this time period, many other areas in North and South America are becoming independent from European powers. We use our might, having won the War of 1812, to tell Europe to stay out of North America. Don't interfere with independent countries. This becomes the Monroe Doctrine.
Stay out of Riverdale.
The Monroe Doctrine is an aggressive foreign policy that some would argue the United States has kept to this day. As we grow more powerful, we decide that God wants us to spread from coast to coast, the East Coast to the West Coast. This becomes known as Manifest Destiny. Andrew Jackson was one of the champions of Manifest Destiny. He drove out 16,000 Cherokee Indians from their home, made them march by force to Oklahoma, where many lost their lives.
Do yourself a favor. Don't turn around.
After looking at Trail of Tears, we continued on troubling topics, spending some time looking at slavery. You wrote amazing historical narratives telling us about the lives of slaves. You mentioned their oppression, their songs, their folk tales, their escapes, their leaders, abolitionists, the Middle Passage. And through this story, you showed us, you understood what it could be like to be a slave.
Dearest Diary, today I am the happiest girl in Springfield.
See? All good.
Because tomorrow I shall get my very first slave.
After coming back from break, we looked at the causes of the Civil War. We focused on all the things politicians tried to do to make slavery okay. Fugitive Slave Act, Dred Scott decision, the Missouri Compromise, Kansas-Nebraska Act, Bleeding Kansas, John Brown's raid. All these were attempts to postpone the inevitable, which became the Civil War. The Civil War, we spent time creating websites and advertising generals and their resumes. We created websites as if we were doing modern day Civil War tours, where we studied about battles and strategies and leaders and what made the Civil War memorable.
Bang! Bang! Pow! Pow! Hit with stick! Hit with stick!
At the conclusion of the Civil War, we took a look at our president, Abraham Lincoln, who essentially lived only a week or two after the war before he was assassinated.
I thought that Civil War would never end. Now to soothe my head with an evening at Ford's Theater. Oh no! John Wilkes Booth!
Hasta la vista, Eddie.
Come on, boy! Finish him off!
We closed the year looking at Reconstruction and how the United States tried to rebuild itself after the Civil War.
Bye, diddly eye. So long.
God bless you.
See ya.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye, Homer!
Take care.
So long!
Bye-bye.
Ta-ta. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Sayonara, dude.
So long.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye now.
Bye!
See ya.
Bye. Bye-bye.
I'm gonna miss Springfield. This town's been awfully good to us.
No, it hasn't, Dad. That's why we're leaving.
Oh, yeah. So long, stink town!